Keep Our Republic is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Since the spring of 2020, we've been doing our part to help keep our republic. We do it through hyper-localized civic education. We talk with Americans through town halls, legal seminars, media briefings, and other events. We know a lot of Americans have a lot of questions right now about how our democracy really works. Questions like, what actually happens behind the scenes on election night, and just what is the power of the federal courts? That's why we're talking directly to election officials and judges from across the country. Together, we can help answer some of those questions. Welcome back, everyone, to Keepers of Our Republic. My name is Brooke. I'm the Special Projects Manager here at Keep Our Republic. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to strengthen trust in our elections and our democratic institutions. Today, I am sitting down with Judge John Jones. He served as the Chief Judge of the U.S. Middle District Court of Pennsylvania. After 19 years on the bench, he issued a number of influential rulings and is joining us now also as President Jones after taking the helm at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania recently. Thank you for joining us, Judge, and welcome.
Great to be with you.
Well, I can tell right off the bat, if I didn't know you already, that you are a man who enjoys a challenge, because potentially the two most fraught professions in America right now may have to be the legal profession and education. What has that transition been like, going from the bench into education, out of curiosity?
Interestingly, I'll start with a humorous story. When I was puzzling over whether to accept the draft by my alma mater, I didn't seek this position, but the position kind of sought me. And I called a former colleague of mine who had been chief judge in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And I couldn't talk to my mates on the bench because I knew that they would not be objective. I was the chief judge, and as I've joked, from a mercenary standpoint, they wouldn't want me to leave because it could be a while till my successor was confirmed and they'd get all my cases. So they thought, well, they're not going to give me an honest appraisal. So I called this former colleague who had gone into private practice and been quite successful doing it a couple of years before. And I said that I was considering the position of becoming president of my alma mater, of Dickinson College, and what did he think of that, having moved over to the other side, so to speak. And he said, there's two things I want you to remember, but first I'm going to tell you that I think you're perfect for the job, and you have the type of personality and the type of abilities that I think would lend themselves to being the president of a college. But he said the two things you have to remember, number one, he said people aren't going to stand up when you enter the room anymore. And he said, and people aren't going to genuflect when you enter a federal courthouse. He said, can you handle that? Can your ego handle that? And I said, I thought that it could. But, in reality, the actual transition was not bad. It's just that it's a distinctly different kind of job that is much less structured than, being a federal judge. The good news for me is that I'm generally a people person, and that kind of cuts against the being a federal judge. I loved being a federal judge, don't get me wrong, and I loved running a courtroom, and I loved taking a swing at big cases. But to be a little bit liberated and unleashed in a different job has been really wonderful and very, very fulfilling. I'm starting my fifth year and love the job. Love being a judge, but I'm blessed that I love this too.
That's great. And entering into another school year here, I'm sure we cannot possibly guess what this next semester or two will bring. But yeah, it's exciting. I'm sure to enter this new career with different limitations and and then on top of it, because you obviously don't have enough going on, you've also kindly joined the Article 3 coalition at Keep Our Republic. So I just wanted to ask, like, with someone that's already got a full docket in your life, like why take on this additional responsibility?
Well, it was kind of a natural move for me. First of all, I joined Keep Our Republic several years ago at the request of Ari Middleman, who I've come to be great friends with, and worked pretty hard during 2024, in particular on election matters. So I kind of knew the players, a number of the players, Ari in particular. And when this started to germinate, this under the KOR umbrella, one of the things that my communications people have done is they position me as a legal talking head, which comes very easily for me. And I do a fair amount of network work, and I write op-eds, and I speak out in defense and in support of the federal judiciary. So, to join people of my ilk who are similarly motivated, and that's the cohort of retired federal judges who make up, along with very able staff members, the Article 3 coalition. There's power in numbers, and it's really been fun to reconnect with some judges that I knew previously, and a lot of judges that I had known about nationally, but really never had the opportunity to get to know, such as Judge Michelle, who I've come to be great friends with him. I knew Judge Sindrich, for example, because he was in the Western District of Pennsylvania, but I've come to know him so much better, and so forth. So it's been a really rewarding endeavor. I try not to I get asked to do a lot of things, and I try not to spread myself too thin, and I also try not to engage in matters that I don't have a passion for, because at this stage of my life, with all the responsibilities I have as president, I always believe that to be a joiner, who's a show horse and not a workhorse is not a good move to make. And if I can't devote the right amount of time to a project, that I'm not going to join. But happily, I've been able to do that, I think.
Yeah, we've done a number of events with Dickinson over the years. You guys have been such an awesome partner, particularly in 2024. I know we did a ton of events, both with you personally and then obviously with the college. So backing up for a second, a moment ago you said one of the things you enjoyed about being on the bench was that you like taking, big swings at big cases. And it's interesting if you read sort of a history of some of the big name cases that you worked on and that you issued opinions on. If you ask the average person on the street and you showed them the outcome of those cases, I think the average person might be kind of shocked to know that you were a Bush appointee. And so I want to ask, because it's impossible to even mention a judge in a newspaper or to talk about a judge, it feels like these days, without being like Judge so and so, an Obama appointee, Judge so and so, a Trump appointee. Like, it's become just kind of part of your name as a judge in the public discourse. And so I kind of want to talk about, like, what is the reality in your experience of being an appointee by a member of a certain party, and how, if any, does that actually play out in your rulings?
I was active in politics before I took the bench. I was a member of former Pennsylvania Governor Ridge's senior team. I'd been a loyal Republican for all the time that I was practicing law before I went on the bench. And um, I'll say this: it was a time where you could be more moderate as a Republican
Yeah.
than the Republicans represent themselves, at least the mainstream Republicans today, whatever passes for a mainstream Republican. So yeah, I was endorsed by Senator Arlen Specter and Rick Santorum. Specter being very moderate to liberal,
Yeah.
Santorum, of course, being very conservative. But no one really litmused me. I went through the usual protocols, the interview with the White House counsel and so forth, but I didn't go through the kind of searing, I think, litmus test that people have today. And I found it very enlightening. A couple of years after I was on the bench, I had a case that involved an attempt to teach an alternative to evolution in ninth grade science class. And
Mhm.
to the point about who appoints you, I joked that I thought my name had been changed from Judge John Jones to Bush appointed Judge John Jones. And of
Mhm.
course, when people do that, it sets up
Yeah.
a set of expectations that you're going to rule in a way that's true to your school. And more often than not, particularly at the district court level, that's a misnomer. And yet I understood that people had those expectations. And then when I ruled on the case and found that the school district's activities violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, and that it was essentially an attempt to teach something that was relabeled creationism. There was the usual hue and cry from some conservative Republicans that I was not true to my school, and that I should be ashamed of myself, and that I was ruling in a way that was inconsistent with Republican dogma. It was very enlightening to me at that time. But I'm proud of the record that I had. I mean, you look at Judge Cullen recently, who dismissed what I feel was a rather ludicrous suit that joined the entire Maryland federal court over a
Yeah.
standing order, and he's a Trump appointee, and he dropped a footnote and decried the various inflammatory and really harsh and false uh, kind of terms that the Trump administration members, including the president himself, have used to describe lower court judges. He didn't pull any punches when he did it, and that's what judges are supposed to do. We're an independent, co-equal branch of government, and not everybody recognizes that. Not everybody recalls their civics lessons, and I'm remain proud of the third branch, which I think is standing strong under some very difficult circumstances.
So what do you think, how did we get here, or were we always here? Was it always so highly partisanized and or politicized, and we're just kind of noticing now because of social media and the news cycle? Or do you feel strongly that this has really ramped up in the last couple of
Oh,
years?
I think this is completely unprecedented.
Yeah.
It's certainly in my experience as a lawyer and as a judge, I never saw a climate like this.
Yeah.
The name calling from the administration is really troubling. And of course, look, I always say lower court judges expect to get reversed. It goes with the
Hmm.
territory. None of us liked it. It doesn't warm your heart when you get a decision from the circuit court that reverses you, but you move on, take your lumps, and hopefully you learn from the experience. Sometimes you disagree with the circuit court and the reversal, but it doesn't really matter. They have the
Yeah.
last word on it, or the Supreme Court, as it were. So, that goes with the territory. But to lodge these personal attacks, to
Yeah.
dox judges, to call out their family members in the very worst iteration, this bombarding judges with pizzas,
Hmm.
some of which are attributed to my former colleague Esther Salas's murdered son, Danny Andrel. I think that's barbaric, and I talk to my former colleagues with some frequency, and they are apprehensive. What changed since I became a judge is the ability of anyone to locate any other person in the
Yeah.
United States. And you'd have to work hard when I first got on the bench to figure out where I lived. No more. Even though there are laws that call for redaction and non-publication of certain personally identifiable information, it doesn't matter. You can find people, and I think a lot of judges have been looking over their shoulder, and they'll tell you that well, they don't love to be under threat. They accept the risk or accepted the risk when they got on the bench. They're really concerned for their family members, and I
Yeah.
and I understand that.
Yeah. What, so in the face of such, I mean, just cruelty, barbarism, you said it, and you have this co-equal third branch of government, but when the other two branches have the power of the press and the bully pulpit and an ability to get on Twitter and talk about anything without any repercussion, and you've got district courts, our circuit courts, even the Supreme Court to a certain extent, cannot speak freely, which is proper when you've got a case in front of you. What is the answer then to this like kind of imbalance of being able of one branch not really being able to speak up for themselves?
That's a really interesting question, and there's a current kind of contretemps going on that I'm really concerned about. As you know, the Supreme Court has been increasingly utilizing the shadow docket.
Hmm.
And in a recent decision in the so-called AFA case, I know you're aware of this, Justice Gorsuch, joined by Justice Kavanaugh, took a real shot at a lower court judge and it essentially said that lower court judges are not free to disregard rulings from the Supreme Court. The ruling in question was less than clear,
Yeah.
and there's been a great debate over whether the shadow docket rulings are precedential or not. They now say that they are precedential, but they're very thinly reasoned by, they say, the justices say, necessity. I frankly thought that Justice Gorsuch's attack on lower court justices was in a word gratuitous, and it was
Yeah.
also unfortunate. And so, in the opinion that dealt with the Harvard funds that Judge Burroughs in Massachusetts just unfroze, in her opinion yesterday,
Hmm.
she cited in her footnote 9 the statement by, or the concurring opinion by, Justice Gorsuch, and in effect said, "Look, we're doing the best we can here. You're
Yeah.
not giving us much to work with." And so it's one thing to have incoming fire from other branches. It's another thing to have an internecine battle within a branch itself. That's
Yeah.
really tough. And Benjamin Franklin famously intoned the day the Declaration of Independence was signed, that we must all hang together, or most assuredly we'll hang separately.
Hmm.
I'm sorry to see, when the third branch starts to come a cropper because there's strife between the Supreme Court and frankly inappropriate language by the Supreme Court that disconnects from lower court judges. That's not a good thing, and really plays into the hands of those who would make the third branch subservient. So there's a lot of things going on right now that are really deleterious to the orderly operation of the third branch and the rule of law. And at the end of the day, as Alexander Hamilton said, the third branch has, neither the sword nor the purse. And so what it does have is its credibility, its
Yeah.
integrity with the general public. And if you lose that, and I fear that, this drumbeat of attacks is tearing away at the reputation of the third branch. You lose that, and if you project as the chief executive, and we can get into this area if you want, but if you project as the chief executive that we will obey the Supreme Court, but we'll pick and choose what we want to obey in the lower courts, or as the Constitution calls them, the inferior courts, and we'll recognize some orders if we agree with
Yeah.
them, and others if we don't. That's a bad path to travel, I think.
So going back to your comment about the executive and the potential for uh, the other branches to say, well, that's in the words of, I believe it was President Jackson on the Cherokee ruling, that's fine, you've made your ruling. why don't you go enforce it, to paraphrase him. Um, how in danger, how close do you think we are, or are we over the line already of having an executive that is just openly flaunting and disregarding the rule of law in terms of court orders?
Well, it's interesting. It depends where do you draw the line.
Yeah.
It's quite clear to me, and I think to other observers, that this administration has failed to adhere to some lower court decisions. They just have, and that sometimes they do it in a way that's a little softer than others. Sometimes they do it directly. Most
Hmm.
notable hard case would be the case in front of Judge Boasberg, when he quite clearly issued an order from the bench that the government disregarded,
Yeah.
and I think they without question they violated that order. Then you look at cases like Abrego Garcia, where the Supreme Court, essentially um, wordsmithed an opinion and substituted the lower court's verbiage with the word facilitate, Abrego Garcia's return. And any reasonable observer or reader of that opinion would think that the Supreme Court was ordering him to be returned.
Right.
But the administration gamed that for months and
Yeah.
said, well, facilitate means do the best you can. And if El Salvador says no, then we don't have to bring him back. Well, of course, they ultimately brought him back, but not necessarily, in compliance with that order, but probably not to force a confrontation. So, I think if you call that a constitutional crisis, that the administration is cherry picking lower court orders, that's fair. I don't know that it's risen to that level, but it's
Hmm.
alarming to me, and very unhelpful. I think the real risk is that, and this hasn't happened yet, but that you'll have a United States Supreme Court decision that the administration tries to game.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't happen. They don't seem to want to fight that fight so far, but nothing surprises me today.
And, that gamesmanship isn't happening with Trump. It's not Trump alone in the Oval Office thinking, how can we um, outmaneuver this ruling, right? Like this is a team. This is what's disturbing to me is there's teams and teams of politicians, but attorneys who are facilitating the executive and their allies in the legislative to do these maneuvers. And so for me, it almost comes down to a breakdown of like the entire legal profession. Like attorney, the idea that you must have candor before the court as an attorney, as a former litigator myself, is just mind-boggling to me. Some of the things that we're seeing said in court or put in these briefings by actual licensed barred attorneys. And so I wonder, like, is that maybe where we need to focus our effort in
Well,
terms
it's
of,
ba- it's
yeah,
it's bad on so many levels,
yeah,
because you know that as a former litigator, which I know you were, it puts attorneys in a terrible position,
yeah,
and it's cost some of them their jobs, their livelihood, and even for those who've remained with the administration, they're getting strafed by federal judges who are incredulous about what's coming out of these folks' mouths.
yeah.
If they want to keep their job, it's like they're making a hostage tape when they're in front of judges, and they're choosing their words carefully, or they get sacked. And then you have a culture that arises where it's kind of like a macho thing among members of the administration to parrot the company line. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
In the LA case, where the National Guard was sent out there, and you had the ruling with respect to what a couple of rulings, as you
Hmm.
know, in that case, and one ruling was about what the Guard could and couldn't do. And the Secretary of Defense Hegseth's response was, well, we're not going to let a single federal court govern national security. And that's I mean, that's obviously a mischaracterization
Right.
of what happened. I mean, if national security interests invoke, a constitutional or involve a constitutional protection, yes, the court can rule in certain cases with, where necessary, appropriate deference to the executive. So, there's a culture that has arisen, whether it's immigration, whether it's the National Guard being called in, what have you, that I think is pervasive now and really difficult. And as you said, you have lawyers who it's like name, rank, and serial number, when they're in
Yeah.
front of judges, and it's now as you know, having litigated, I mean, one of the tools in the toolbox that I had was I accepted that in open court and on the record that lawyers had to watch their words. Not that they were unethical, but they got clients sitting in the courtroom, and they had to take the party line, and they had to be zealous advocates
Right.
for their clients. If I had that and it became debilitating, I'd call a timeout and go into chambers. And there was a time, I'm not sure that exists anymore, where I could go into chambers off the record and say, "Look, I know what you're doing, uh, and I understand why you have to do it, but let's have a frank conversation about where we're
Yeah.
going with this case." I'm not sure they have those conversations anymore. I don't know that it's any different in chambers than
Yeah.
it was before,
Then it is.
and that's sad because
Yeah.
the system works better. Even if that candor is behind closed doors, at least you get a sense and a feel for what's happening.
Yeah.
If you again, as an experienced lawyer, if the lawyer went into chambers and said, "Your Honor, look, I'm sorry, I'm temporizing here. I'm dancing a dance that's difficult." I mean, I've been there, done that as a
Yeah.
litigator.
We all have.
Yeah, well, sure, but I don't know that
Yeah.
those honest conversations are taking place, and that's sad. That's really too bad.
All right. So before I let you go, I want to ask, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask a collegiate president sitting in front of me the state of education and how we can maybe try to make sure that this next generation of kids inherits better civic education and a better appreciation for the rule of law. What do you think needs to be done at the educational level to try to repair some of this damage?
I was friends with I came to know really largely after she left the bench with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who was just the most marvelous person, and I was privileged to spend some time with her, and she had a passion for civics education, and she had a famous line that she used that she said that we must learn and relearn these things because they're not stamped on our DNA. And I always thought that was just the greatest line
Yeah.
that she used. And she did so much to foster civics education. And the other thing is, I love swearing in new citizens. I do it at least once or twice a year. And, it was a big assemblage in the ceremonial courtroom. And it was so rewarding to do that and see the enthusiasm of the new citizens. But I
Yeah.
was left to observe a lot of times that they were more up to speed on civics education than a number of people that I could drag off the street who had been born
Right.
in this country. I don't worry about my students at Dickinson. They're exemplary students and they understand what's going on. I think the real problem is that we kind of directed away culturally from American history, and now we're politicizing American history, and now
Hmm.
we have this great debate over, how do we teach slavery, revisionist history. We have to be positive. We can't, teach about the warts and so forth. And that's really obscuring the need, I think, to your question, to have a good bedrock civics education. Because if you don't understand your rights, of course, you're more prone to lose your rights. So I don't have an
Yep.
easy answer, to it. I don't worry about my students. The biggest worry I have about my students is that I want them to feel that whether they become lawyers or whatever they do, that they can go into public service
Yeah.
And I worry that the tenor of the times is going to discourage people from public service. I love being in
Yeah.
public service. It was a privilege of my life, to do it, and the highest honor I could imagine. I came from a small town in upstate Pennsylvania. I thought I'd be lucky if I someday got to be on the county bench, and never dreamt that I would be a federal judge. And so uh, I tell our students to dream big, but to not lose sight of the fact that it can be the most, as you know, the most rewarding life to serve the public, and it opens other doors. You don't have to
Oh,
do
yeah.
it your entire life. So those are the things that I worry about, that our students will get discouraged. But I'm not seeing that. I still see a great enthusiasm, and I try to tell them that historically, I've been around a while. Things have been worse than this. My formative years, when I was a kid, were filled with assassinations,
Mm.
National Guard troops shooting at students, riots, cities burning down. They were very challenging times in the 60s and the 70s. So as tough as this is, and as hopeless as it seems, I am the quintessential, sort of positive optimist. And, I think to bring it back around from the standpoint of A3C, we're a force for good, and we need to keep speaking out, and this will pass.
Well, I love when we can end on a positive note. So we're just going to leave it there. I'll take the wins I can in 2025. Judge, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the work you're doing with the Article 3 Coalition. You've been a long friend of the organization and now a friend of the podcast. And looking forward to having you again sometime and continuing this conversation.
This has been a real privilege.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, please share it on social media and tell your friends. It's the best way for folks to find out about us. I hope you'll agree that our guest is indeed a keeper of the Republic. If you want to learn more about how you can help keep our Republic, stop on over to our website, keepourrepublic.org.